G'day everyone. The time's come for the BMW to have a brake overhaul. So, in this YouTube series, I'm going to show you how to remove your calipers all the way around, replace your old rubber hoses with braided steel ones, replace your brake pads, and also paint those dirty black old calipers a nice shiny red. So, let's get to it and remove those calipers. So, one of the first things you have to do is go around and loosen all your wheel nuts, and then jack up your car and remove all the wheels. Okay, so the wheels are off and the car is jacked up. Now it's time to go ahead and remove the calipers. So what I'll do today, I'm actually going to disconnect my brake lines running to my caliper, both in the front and the rear, because I'm going to replace them too, but that will be in the next video. And that way I can get the entire caliper away from the car, so we're not having to tape anything up and potentially get paint on our disc. It's a bit hard to make out because the lighting's poor, but there's cracks in the rubber hose to my brake lines, and this is the reason I'll be replacing them as well. There you go. See these cracks? That's no good. You don't want that, because they could fail, and if they fail, you don't have any brakes. So let's go ahead, remove the line, remove the guide pin bolts at the back, remove the spring clip, take away the caliper, and also remove the inner part of the caliper from the knuckle at the back with the 2 bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Here you can see removing the brake spring clip with a screwdriver. It pops right off and it's quite easy. Next, remove the plugs that cover your guide pin bolts. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and crack the thread that holds the brake line to the car before I remove the caliper. That way it should be a bit easier, rather than when the caliper's hanging by its line. So what you have to use, by the looks of things, on this car is a 14mm flare nut wrench. And you really do want to use a flare nut wrench. Go get a kit from Super Cheap Auto, because if you strip out your brake lines, it's very easy to do, and it's just annoying, even if you are replacing them. So get one of these, it's only about 20 bucks. Here I'm removing the guide pin bolts from the front calipers. This is just a 6mm hex head, and it's easy to get off as long as your socket works, unlike mine. There we go. Okay, so the caliper's coming loose now. Before we remove the brake line, I'm going to top up the reservoir in the engine bay. Alright, so you want to top up your reservoir, because if you let the fluid drain too low, it can get into your stability control and ABS system, and then you have to go and take it to a mechanic who flushes it. Okay, that's now full. So full I probably can't put the lid on. So let's go and undo the brake caliper. Okay, so the next thing we have to do once we get the caliper loose is remove the brake line at the back. See, I want to take the caliper away from the car and do the painting. The only problem with this is that once I do that, all the fluid from my master cylinder is going to drain out of the hose, which I've disconnected. And seeing as the calipers are going to be removed for probably a day, that means air is going to get all through my brake system. So what I'm thinking is I'll use my replacement brake lines, which I have here. I'll try and connect the end of the brake line here once I remove it, and then run it as high as I can, and hopefully that stops most of the leaking. If that works, then I should be fine to remove all the calipers using this method. Okay, so I just completed that. Sorry I couldn't film it, my hands are too dirty to activate the camera. But you can see here that I've attached the new braided brake line, which I'll be replacing as well as painting my calipers. So what I did is I disconnected it here, took this off. That allowed me to untwist the cable at this end without it turning too much, and then I put this cable on. You can see it's actually leaking. So I'm going to try and lift it up and see if that fixes the problem. Here is the original rubber brake line that went to the brake caliper. And if you look closely here, you can see cracks right there. And these are really bad. You don't want this to be cracked, and so that's why we're replacing them. Out with the old, in with the new. Okay, so I've just lifted the cable all the way up as high as I can, and because the top of that cable is higher than the top of the reservoir, it shouldn't be able to leak. We should be good to take the caliper off now. Okay, and that is the caliper removed. The next step is to remove the inner part of the caliper. This has two bolts at the back which bolt to the knuckle. It's very easy, just get a spanner or a breaker bar, get in there and undo them, and I'll film that for you. There we go. Bloody tight. It's a 19mm spanner. Okay, this is the inner part of the caliper removed. The two bolts come out pretty easily once you get them loose, and that's all there is to it, and that is the front caliper removed. Okay, I'm going to film this side and see how quickly we can get through removing the front left caliper. Alright, so I'm removing the spring clip here. Next, the covers for the guide pin bolts. Next, I'm using the flare nut wrench and an 11mm normal spanner to remove the brake line from the back of the wheel arch. Now I'm installing the new brake line, doing it up tight. Next I'm removing the guide pin bolts at the back. Once these are removed, I remove the brake line sensor, remove the caliper, and then the inner part of the caliper. Okay, and that is both the front calipers removed. Here we have the left side, and here we have the right side. I've kept all the bolts in their own bag so they don't get lost. And now the next step is to remove the rear calipers. Okay, to remove the rear calipers is pretty much the same as the front calipers. You have a spring clip here, which you need to pry off. And there's also the two guide pins which run here into the caliper. There's two rubber brake lines on the rear, which if you're doing your brake lines, you should replace both. One that runs from the caliper to this mounting point here, and then there's another rubber hose on the other side of this. Now remove the brake line here as we did on the front, disconnect that, connect our new brake line, and then run it nice and high so it can't leak, and then we should be free to remove the other end of the rubber brake line. Start off by removing the brake caliper spring clip. Next, remove your guide pin bolts at the back of your caliper. In this case, my ratchet actually broke, so I had to use a hex head with a spinner attached around the outside and a hammer to get them undone. Use an 11mm and a 14mm to get the top brake line undone. Here you can see me undoing the brake fittings with the flare nut spinner and the 11mm spinner. and also installing the new brake line, although it's not too clear in the video. Okay, so to stop the brake line from leaking, I got my new brake line and I attached it, and then I got the old one, which I'd taken off, and attached it to the top. And so this has lifted the brake line high enough that it won't leak anymore, hopefully overnight. Here you can see me using a brake plier as well as a ratchet to remove the inner part of the caliper by removing the 2 bolts. Okay, that's the rear inner part of the caliper completely removed. Time to do the last brake caliper, and then we'll move on to cleaning. I removed the spring clip, the guide pin bolt covers. I removed the brake line at the top. I installed a new brake line. Next, I removed the guide pin bolts. Then I removed the inner bolts for the inner part of the caliper, and then we're done. Alright, so here are all 4 calipers off of the car, laid out in the way that they came off. I've kept all the bolts in bags so they don't get confused. We'll be painting the calipers and the inside parts red, and because I don't have replacements, I'm going to sand the spring clips back so they're nice and clean. Okay, that concludes this part of the video. Go check out the second part to see how to clean and then paint your calipers.